Now let's get into our first topic called code commits. And so version control is the ability to understand the various changes that happen to your code over time. And so having a code repository basically enables you to do version control. And the version control, the most popular system that we have out there is called Git. And you may have heard of it. I think it has taken the internet by storm, and now every new developer, uses Git for version control. And so the Git repository can live on your machine, my machine, anyone's machine, but it usually also lives on a central online repository. So basically this is where the users will get their pushes and their pulls from their code, and this is where the version control will happen centrally. And the benefits of using a centralized Git repository is that you can collaborate with other developers. So if you have a big team of 10, 20, or even more developers in your company, it's great to use a version control mechanism such as Git. And you want to make sure that the code is backed up somewhere. So if you have a new developer coming in, you don't just send him the code from your machine. You tell him, hey, this is the central Git repository, go get it from there. And you make sure that anyone can view the code, even new developers, old developers. It's fully auditable because we know who pushed code where, and it is really an added benefit of version control. There's obviously way more features out of this, such as rollbacks, etc. But you get the idea. Once you're a developer and you start using version control, I promise you won't get away from it. So this is our code commit. And where does code commit come in? Well, basically, we're a developer and we want to push the code to code repository as often as possible. But it turns out that when you start running a business, the Git repository can become quite expensive. And the industry includes GitHub, and GitHub is awesome when you do open source development and you have free public repositories as unlimited as you want. But if you start doing stuff for your company, it becomes paid for private ones, okay? You can use Bitbucket, and there's other tools in the industry, but basically AWS came in and said, listen, we're going to offer AWS Code Commit, and it's going to be also a Git repository, but hopefully less expensive. And so the whole idea is that AWS Code Commit repositories are private. Okay, this is just something to be having inside of your own organization. There is no size limits on the repository, so it will scale seamlessly if you have 1 kilobyte of code, or if you have 1 terabyte of, no, maybe not 1 terabyte, but 1 gigabyte of code, it will scale seamlessly. And it's fully managed, it's highly available. It's something that's quite nice, so that you have as a guarantee to have something managed, because we don't need to think about how to provision machines, etc., etc. And then the code is only in your AWS cloud accounts. So that means that the code really never leaves your infrastructure. It's always there. And so it probably makes your security team and your compliance team happier about it, right? And then finally, just to add on to the security features, then we have encryption and access control, etc., etc. And for terms of like, hey, if I'm working in AWS, am I locked into AWS? The answer is no. It is definitely integrated with other tools such as Jenkins, CodeBuild, or other third-party CI tools. So overall, Code Commit is basically a Git repository that's fully featured and quite secure. So talking about security, because it is such an important section at the exam to understand, Code Commit security is a bit complicated, but sometimes straightforward. So I'll do my best to teach it to you. Interactions that are using Git. So it's still Git that you're using. It's standard commands, git clone, git push, git commit, all this stuff you've been using. Git on your machine will work with code commits, right? When you authenticate in Git, you have SSH keys. And so as an AWS user, you can configure your own SSH key in your IAM console. We will not do this in the lab. Or you can use HTTPS. And it's using the same IAM console. And so you can either use the CLI authentication helper, which I think is a little bit complicated, but you should know about it. And you can also generate your own HTTPS credentials. This is what we'll do in the labs, okay? And finally, if you want extra security on the authentication, you can use MFA, so multi-factor authentication. And that just makes sure that your users are really the one you trust. So that's all for authentication. For example, for GitHub, it also has SSH and HTTPS. Now, authorization. So when you're authenticated to your Git, you also need to be authorized to do stuff on your Git repository. And so for this, you can use IAM policies. And IAM policies, they help manage your IAM users or IAM roles, basically to make sure that they have the right rights to the repositories. For encryption, we have the repository are automatically encrypted at rest using KMS. So anytime you see encryption at rest, think KMS, and that's automatic. You don't even have to set it. It's just done for you. And obviously, because we use HTTPS or SSH, they all have a S in it, stands for secure. And so that means that your data, your code is encrypted in transit when you push it. Now, if you want to enable cross-account access, that's a very common question at the exam as well. How do I give access to my code commits repository to someone else, in another account? Well, do not ever share your SSH keys. That's a security risk. So don't ever do this. That's bad. It's like your credentials as well. Do not ever share your AWS credentials. This is also really, really, really bad. The right way of doing it is to use an IAM role in your AWS account, and then the other person has to use AWS STS. It's basically a cross-account access API call called assume role, and basically they will be able to access your code commit repository. You don't need to know exactly how to do it, just need to know that to give someone access to your repository, you use STS and an IAM role. Okay, so common questions around code commit and GitHub. So the similarity is that they're both Git repositories. They both support code review, so it's called pull request, and they're both integrated with AWS Code Build, which is nice. And finally, they support HTTPS and SSH method authentication, both. So this is quite similar as well. So as a developer, you shouldn't it shouldn't change anything if you work against code commit or GitHub. Now, there's a few differences still on the security side mostly. So GitHub is administered through something called GitHub users, whereas code commit, you will directly use your AWS IAM roles and users. And that's quite nice because when you have a user, centralized into AWS, it's easier to reason about and to manage than having users into different platforms. Now, the hosted is different. When you use GitHub, it's going to be hosted by GitHub, so it's a third party, and you give basically your code to a third party, so there's a bit of trust happening. If you use GitHub Enterprise, that means that you have to self-host GitHub on your servers, and in this case, it's not managed anymore. You have to manage your own servers, and so you lose that aspect. And code commit, well, it's managed by AWS and hosted by AWS, so you have maybe more safety and more security out of it. In terms of the UI, though, GitHub is a clear winner. I find GitHub UI to be fully featured. The code commit UI is a little bit minimal. Finally, a very popular question at the exam as well is around code commit notifications. And so I will give you the answer right here. It is quite confusing. So code commits can integrate with AWS SNS, which stands for Simple Notification Service, or AWS Lambda, or AWS CloudWatch Event Rules. And so based on what you're trying to do, you will be able to integrate with one of these services or the other. So the use case for SNS and AWS Lambda notifications is that you can alert for deletion of branches. You can trigger for when someone pushes code, for example, in the master branch. You can notify external build system, and you can trigger, an AWS Lambda function, and that function can literally perform code-based analysis to maybe see if somehow by mistake someone committed AWS credentials in the code or any credentials at all, and pick that up right away. Okay, so anytime something happens to the code, basically think about it. Every time someone added stuff to the code, you can integrate with SNS and AWS Lambda. But for CloudWatch Event Rules, and it's a bit more confusing, it's more around pull requests. So a pull request update, so someone created a pull request, and a pull request is basically a code review. So someone created a code review, updated it, deleted it, or commented on the pull request. And also whenever someone commits code and comments on top of it, so not when the commit happens, but when a comment happens on top of the commit, and that could be confusing words, as I know, then you can have a CloudWatch Event Rules, okay? And the CloudWatch Event Rules, to add on to the confusion, they will trigger something like a notification into an SNS topic. So I know this can be confusing, but this is something you have to know. Just remember basically the difference, but we'll see this in the hands-on in the next lecture when we use SNS and AWS Lambda versus when we use CloudWatch Event Rules. So I hope that was helpful as an intro to Cloud Commits. Let's go ahead and go with the hands-on now.